the state is required to predetermine the medical necessity of orthodontic services. Is that correct?
Objective form.
The state, through its designated agent, has the requirement to review prior authorization requests for dental services, inclusive of orthodontic services.
Okay, but the state doesn't have to have an agent. It does, but whether it has an agent or not, ultimately the state is responsible for determining the medical necessity of orthodontic services. Isn't that right?
Objective form.
The state is responsible for verifying the medical necessity as submitted by the requesting provider of the medical necessity for the services that are being requested.
Okay, I think that's a little different than the question I asked you. Is the state responsible for determining the medical necessity of orthodontic services?
There's a joint responsibility between the submitting provider making the request and the state.
You did say that you read the 2014 audit, the August 2014 federal audit.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not expecting you to have memorized it, but is it your understanding that this audit said that there's somebody other than the state responsible for ultimately determining the medical necessity of orthodontic services that were provided?
Objective form.
I'm sorry, would you repeat your question, please?
Can you read it back, please?
I'm not expecting you to have memorized it, but is it your understanding that this audit said that there's somebody other than the state responsible for ultimately determining the medical necessity of orthodontic services that were provided?
I don't recall that the report indicated somebody else had that responsibility.
Would you turn to page 6? At the top of that page, under the subsection entitled Office of Inspector General Response, there's a sentence that says, tell me if I read this right. We maintain that TMHP's deficiencies were due to a lack of state agency oversight because the state agency is responsible for contractor compliance. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, sir.
So who is it? The Inspector General, and that's the Inspector General's response, right? That appears to be in this. That's not the federal audit position. That's the Inspector General's response. Is that not correct? Am I not reading that right?
It says Office of Inspector General Response. It doesn't identify whether this is the federal Office of Inspector General's response or the state's Office of Inspector General's response. So given that lack of clarity,
okay,
I can't tell you whose response it is.
Okay. Is the state Office of Inspector General's position different than that stated in this sentence?
Objective form. This goes beyond what this witness is the topics that this witness is testifying on today.
I disagree. I think it's directly relevant because it goes to policies and procedures.
Well, what you're asking about is a federal audit of HHSC, and you're asking her specifically about what the audit says, and that's not, one of the topics does not include the federal audit of HHSC. So she's not here to speak on behalf of OIG on the contents of this particular audit.
Why did you look at this audit in preparation for this position?
To be familiar with what the audit's findings were.
Okay. And did the audit find that the state agency was ultimately responsible for contractor compliance?
Objective form outside the scope of the notice.
You can answer the question.
That is what is stated in it, yes, sir.
Does the OIG disagree with that position?
Objective form outside the scope of the notice.
I have not discussed with Inspector General Wilson with regards to OIG's position with this particular audit report.
I understand, but that's not the question I asked you. The question I asked you is it the OIG's position that the state is not responsible? That's not actually the question I asked you. The question I asked you was, is it the OIG's position that the state agency is responsible for contractor compliance?
Objective form.
The state is responsible for contractor compliance.